significant. That means they're still important to our tradition. They're still part of our resources. The difference is that they are not part of the canonical books. That's why they're called non-canonical. And later on, we will encounter some other names that are referred to this body of materials or documents that we have. So when we talk about non-canonical books, we also refer to them as para-biblical, extra-canonical. So parang biblical. So in this, it's that they are practically uh, you could probably observe them as something that are in the same league as some of the documents that we have in the Bible, but unfortunately they were not included in the official list. That's why they are basically there, but still very important part of our resources. So these are Jewish and Christian writings that failed to be included. So most of them were written between 200 BCE and 200 CE. So as I mentioned, they are called non-canonical, parabiblical, or extra-canonical. That means because they're outside of the canon. These are writings that are important aids to interpreting scripture because they help us understand the rich diversity of perspectives, especially prevalent during biblical times. So these books can still basically help us understand, especially the context of the time when most of these things were written. So they can provide us with some added information. Now, there are four categories into this significant non-canonical books. So we have the Old Testament Pseudepigrapha, then the Dead Sea Scrolls, which has been discovered just recently, almost in the 20th century already. And then we have what is known as the New Testament Apocrypha. And then lastly, we have the Apostolic Fathers. So for this morning's session, we will just dwell with the first two, since we'll basically try to contain our lecture time as much as possible. So the first one that we have is the Old Testament Pseudepigrapha. We have in our library, it's unfortunate that we are not together in a classroom. I would usually bring into class copies of the Old Testament Pseudepigrapha. It's a rather large book that contains many of these materials there. So we have several copies of them. So later on, when the situation is much better and we are back to school, you can probably locate them in the reference section in the library. Pseudepigrapha, the word means false titles or superscriptions. Pseudo and graphe. So pseudo is false, and then graphe has something to do with writing. So that's why it's called false titles or superscriptions, at least etymologically. But generally, these are documents which are falsely ascribed writings. That means they were written and carry some names to it, but sometimes the name has nothing to do with actually the text itself. Maybe the name was just used to add reputation, honor to the writing. So it's falsely ascribed writings. That is, they are books attributed or ascribed to somebody other than the real author. So again, you may start questioning who are the real authors. Again, it's a very difficult endeavor to accomplish. But maybe if you are patient enough, you'll be able to actually locate it or find it out or research them yourself. But for our purposes, it's important that we have these materials, and these materials are helpful to a certain degree for study of the text of the Bible. So they're mostly from the 3rd century BCE and the 2nd century CE. The latest items may possibly date to sometime after the 4th or the 5th century. So one of the characteristics of these documents are they resemble the biblical writings, but they are not incorporated into the Bible. They were composed originally in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, like basically the books that we have in the Bible. So typically, prominent individuals alleged to have received revelations. That's usually the context of these writings. In other cases, biblical narratives furnish the basis for expanded stories. That means you already have, like for example, in the Pentateuch, in Deuteronomy or Genesis, you have a story there, and then they want to extend or expand that story. So they become basically the contents of some of these books that we have here. Also, the Psalter The Psalms provides models for poems that are included in this collection. Then you have the Jewish wisdom literature. They help shape new compositions as well. The different literary genre or forms that they appear in are apocalypses, so they're apocalyptic materials, testaments. Testaments is something to do with almost like the last will and testament. Then histories. Of course, when we talk about histories here, it's not really strictly speaking historical because that may not be really the concern of the writer, but it's just probably reporting an event, of course, with some changes here and there. Philosophies and Psalms. So these are not a complete list of the genre, but generally they fall under these different categories. Here's the Old Testament Pseudepigrapha. So you have these books. Among the apocalypses, you have the first book of Enoch, the Apocalypse of Elijah, and Syriac Apocalypse of Baruch, or second book of Baruch. Now, most of these materials are actually available in the internet. If you just search them, you'll find them. About the testaments, we have the Testament of Job, the Assumption of Moses. So it's not only Mary that assumed into heaven, so you have Assumption of Moses. Anyway, in Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs. Regarding histories, you have Jubilees and Ascension of Isaiah as an example. And then the philosophies, you have the fourth book of Maccabees. In our Bible, we only have up to second book of Maccabees, but there's still the fourth one, aside from the third, which is present in the Orthodox collection. And then the Psalms. What is comparable to the Psalm would be the Odes of Solomon. So you are probably familiar with the literary form that is called ode. It's almost like a hymn or a tribute to Solomon. So that's basically the contents of the Old Testament Pseudepigrapha. Now, if you want more information about it, you can try to write down this website. It's wesley.nnu.edu/biblical. Then you basically have those. You can probably find it more information there. Now, when you're using internet sites for biblical researches and so on, it's always advisable to make sure that the website that you visit is a website that is based in an educational institution. Like here, basically, you have that edu, because that means it's a well-researched materials or contents. Because if you don't do that, you will be brought to some apologetic or some proselytizing, websites and so on, which are pretty much already like giving you certain perspective and will not help you entertain other ways of looking at things. But if it is in the context of a school, you know that the research is normally as much as possible objective, and they are more or less open in the discussion. So it's I always remember that when you want to use materials from the internet, as much as possible, they are basically from educational institutions. Now, what are the recurring themes that you find in this collection of books? So these are some of the recurring themes that are common in this collection. Origin of evil. So that's why if you want to know the origin of evil other than what the Bible can say, so this might be probably the books that you need to go into. If you want to know more about the end of the world, then you have this also in these books. The Messiah. Would be interesting to know how they look at the Messiah in the context of these writings. The transcendence of God, the resurrection of the dead, angels, and then the paradise as the reward for the righteous. So they have also interest in esoteric matters, and figures also dominates the pseudepigrapha. That's why some people are interested basically in these writings because they can provide them with interesting stories here and there. So basically they can use sometimes in their interest, like if you are new age and so on. Sometimes you will find materials in this collection that you have. So anyway, when the esoteric matters that we're referring here basically are some materials that are only that what we call this, that contain information that are only intended for like followers of that group or something like that. So for the initiates, it's not something that is public. So materials like that. So if you, for example, enter a society, they have some materials that are only allowed to be seen by members and so on. So those kind of things. Then these have been submitted to us as mixture of Jewish and Christian elements. The Jews producing majority of the documents, and Christians later would revise them, some of them anyway, like the Ascension of Isaiah. Some, like the Odes of Solomon, have been compiled directly by Christians or influenced by Jewish tradition from before 70 CE. So influenced by either Jewish legends or the Hebrew scripture itself. So that's why you find basically this mixture of Jewish and Christian elements. Then frequently, pseudepigraphon would intentionally but incorrectly claim authorship by a famous predecessor, especially a great Old Testament characters, hence the name pseudepigrapha. It is wrongly ascribed or falsely ascribed to someone. Although writings of this nature are also found in canonical scripture, like Daniel and Song of Solomon would be an example, because Daniel is an apocalyptic material and so on. The large number of pseudepigrapha is evidence of their wide use and great popularity. Some consider them to be divinely inspired. So that means during the time when the biblical books were being written, it was basically an activity that was common. A lot of people were writing, coming up with materials and so on. And many of them were naming them after famous people so that people would actually get interested in them and they would actually read them. What is the effect of these New Testament writers? And what is the effect of these books to the New Testament writers? If you go to Jude, the letter of Jude 14:15, that particular letter explicitly quotes the first book of Enoch, chapter 1, verse 9. You can find it. You can find it there in the text itself. The Gospel's great commandment, Luke 12:29-31, is found in Testament Issachar and Testament of Dan. They are part of the testaments of the 12 patriarchs. Now, reading the pseudepigrapha would enhance our comprehension of Christianity's origins, but even more so our understanding of the kind of Judaism of that period, so that we will understand that we're not just, even if Judaism is mostly represented by rabbinic Jews, the scribes and the Pharisees, but there were actually different other groups other than this mainstream. So you have basically the Essenes, you have the Zealots, and of course the growing number of what do you call this, ancestors of Christianity. So they were Jews, but they were basically shifting their faith because of their acceptance of Jesus as the Messiah. Here is an example of you can find in the book of Enoch. You have basically these contents: Book of Watchers, Parables of Enoch, Books of Astronomy, Book of Dreams, Epistle of Enoch. Just by the content alone itself, you can already see what is the variety that is being mentioned here. Let's look at the details of it. In the books of Watchers concerns fallen angels and their intercourse with women, as well as various visions of Enoch during a tour of heaven, earth, and hell. So if you're interested in that, you just get a copy of the first book of Enoch, and you can find it there. Then you have the Parables of Enoch. It's about the coming judgment of the righteous and the wicked. It provides an exposition of additional heavenly secrets. Then you have a book of astronomy. It has a calendar attested also in the pseudepigraphal Jubilee, similar to the one used by the Qumran community. So it's a calendar. Then Book of Dreams is a biblical history from Adam to the outbreak of the Maccabean revolt. So it tries to basically summarize the contents from Genesis up to Book of Maccabees. The Epistle of Enoch contains an exhortation by Enoch to his sons and something of the form of a testament. Now, the background, the circumstances of the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE, when the Greeks increasingly affected Palestinian Jews in different ways. So this is basically the time after that Palestine was conquered by Alexander and his men. So here's an example of a text that you can find in 1 Enoch 14:8-9. And it says, "And the vision was shown to me thus. Behold, in the vision, clouds invited me, and the mist summoned me. And the course of the stars and the lightnings sped and hastened me. And the winds in the vision caused me to fly, and lifted me upward, and bore me into heaven. And I went in till I drew nigh to a wall which is built of crystals and surrounded by tongues of fire, and it began to affright me." So it's a vision basically of what's there in the beyond or in the heavens and so on. So, but the language, if you look at it, if you have that now in our Bible today, I don't know what interpretation and why we can get up out of it. And of course, people will probably enjoy the what do you call this? The images that this text is actually saying. So there, if you're interested to see more, you can just find a way to read this particular book. Is there anyone trying to ask the question? No. Okay, let me continue. Let's go to the Dead Sea Scrolls. So you've probably heard that the Dead Sea Scrolls are the materials that were recently found in a cave in the Judean desert near to the Dead Sea in 1947. So the caves are called Qumran caves. And if you see a map of Palestine, you just you just locate the Dead Sea, and then in the northern portion of the Dead Sea, you just move basically what do you call this, westward, going to Jerusalem. Then you'll be able to more or less locate where these caves are located. So the languages of the documents found here were Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. And the materials are dated between 2nd century BCE and the 1st century. And the source is a community called Essenes. So again, this particular discovery actually gave a very valuable information to all of us, to biblical scholars especially, that the Judaism of the time were not only consist of the rabbinic Judaism, also for the Zealots as well, because they are mentioned sometimes in the Bible, but they were able to discover that there's such a community called Essenes. So they are also Jewish sect or group, but they have different ways. That's the reason probably why their materials were located in a very far place from the centers, precisely because these are probably people who are like hermits who would run away from the cities and live in isolated areas in the mountains and so on. That's why you found the materials right in the middle of that desert. The location is Kirbet today, or Qumran, basically at that time. Here is a picture of where that is located. So if you notice, just beyond the black thing there, you will see a mound. Those were basically the caves are found in those mounds, and you will see it on the right on this another picture that you have. So it's almost like you have holes here and there. That's where basically they were able to discover them. It was discovered by a pasture. One was pasturing, so like a shepherd, and he was just resting from the heat of the sun, and decided to stay in one of these holes there. And then that's when these materials were eventually discovered. And it's a sample of some of those materials that have been found there. The way the looks of it, I think this one is made of papyrus. That's the reason why it was really not able to survive time. But if they didn't open the jar, probably it would have been intact, because this one can get easily brittle. Most of those well preserved were the ones written in parchment made of animal skin. So that's why they really survived up to the present. So the DSS, not DDS, but DSS found in the desert are religious works, mainly representing a sectarian, that means separatist theology or custom. So the Qumran library betrays a tightly structured community with a hierarchical organization, and the membership of which isolated itself from the rest of contemporary Judaism. Here are some samples of the documents that were found there. You have the rule books, example, Messianic Rule, and the MMT, Miksat Maaseh HaTorah, or some precepts of the law. They were prepared for the sect that believed to be living at the end of the days. So that means the contents of these materials, more or less, are indicative of a group of people who were just waiting for the end time to happen, at least during their time. Now, the literature example commentary on Habakkuk reflects an awareness that the final age's emergence was delayed, but insists that all of God's times will come in their fixed order, and it encourages virtues of hope and perseverance. So these materials were telling them, were basically giving us a view of what they were concerned about during that time. Some documents, for example, War Scroll, show a dualistic opposition between the spirit of light and the spirit of darkness. Maybe in the same theme that you find in the book of Revelation, where it presents basically the eternal fight between God and the forces of evil. While others, like Damascus document, ascribed a role to Belial as a supernatural enemy against God. So Belial is one of the names of the devils or the other gods that were worshipped by other people. So they are basically Belial is presented as the supernatural enemy of God. Then the scrolls reflect their adherents' sense of participating in angelic worlds, evident in their hymnic compositions, such as songs of the Sabbath sacrifice, as well as thanksgiving hymns. So it also give us a glimpse of how they organize their lives. What are the primary importance of the Dead Sea Scrolls? One is that they greatly enrich our understanding of Judaism around the turn of the era. I already told you earlier that they were able to discover that the owners of those collections in the Qumran caves are actually the group called Essenes. They were Jews, but they were like sectarian separatist Jews who would probably leave the city and live away from it because they were preparing for the end times. Secondly, in some cases, it shed light on the pre-Maccabean period, what happened before the book of Maccabees. So at least you can probably have added information from them. So the Dead Sea Scrolls also show variety in text and canon at the turn of the era and help dispel the mirage of a monochromatic Judaism in this period. So that means the text that they have, the canon that they have, again, confirm the reality that there was not just one strand of Judaism, one group of Judaism, but there were several of them, especially during this period. These documents reveal another Jewish party who struggled against principalities or powers and who reinterpreted the scriptures in this context. So I'm referring to the Essenes already. The linkages between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the New Testament are due to the fact that both of them are dated to roughly the same era and derived from a comparable milieu. So that means they are practically like related, similar, identical in so many different ways because they both are product of the same period, the same time. Here's an example from the Thanksgiving hymns. These are basically a sample of what you can expect in terms of its contents. So two groups of hymns. One type uses first-person singular I, characterized by biographical details taken from the life of the speaker. The other type uses the plural we, expresses thoughts and sentiments common to all members of the sect. So here's an example of a Thanksgiving hymns, chapter 4, 9 to 12. But they are sowers of deceit and seers of fraud. They have plotted evil against me to alter your law, which you engraved in my heart by flattering teachings for your people. They have denied the drink of knowledge to the thirsty. In their thirst, they have given them vinegar to drink, to consider their mistake, so that they may act like fools in their feasts, so they will be caught in their nets. So a language like that is something that is more or less similar to what you can find in the biblical books, but also at the same time different. Like here, for example, we don't know exactly what they're talking about, but at least what is initially that you can say that there are people, a group of people that have been sowing some deceit and some frauds and so on to the community. So things like that. So it would be interesting to actually learn more about all of these materials that are here. Okay.